Hey everybody. So we're going off of module 24, retrieval and retrieval failure. That's a very fancy psychological way of saying remembering and forgetting. So retrieval means remembering, and retrieval failure is another word for forgetting or failing to remember. So we talked about lesson objectives 24.1, 2, and 3. And we're now going to talk about 24.4, 24.5, and 24.6. So how can memories change? Why do we forget? And how does amnesia occur? Amnesia is another way of saying memory loss or losing your memory. For today's lecture, make sure you fill out this particular worksheet. I handed this out to you in class, and so I'm going to address each of these questions. Make sure you're taking notes in the space provided. And then don't forget to answer this particular question at the end, which I'll explain. This particular table is in the lecture. I'll explain how to do this question at that point in the lecture. So let's get into it. All right, we're going to skip ahead to the appropriate section. Okay, so can memories change? How reliable are they? So we tend to think of memories in general as being written in stone and unchangeable, that once you put it in your long-term memory, there's no changing it, and almost as if our brains are computers and that every file, every download is in our brain and it's in a perfect state and there's no problems with the file, aka the memory. Sadly, that is not true. Our brains do not have the memory of a hard drive, sadly. What actually happens in the brain is when we encode, when we create a memory, we are splitting it up into different little parts in different parts of the brain. And so every time we try retrieval, so again, there's that word retrieval. Retrieval means remembering. When we try to take that information out, you have to put it back together. You have to reconstruct it. You have to build it back again into one cohesive memory. Now that means that it could be altered, changed. It could be revised, changed a little bit, but still somewhat the same, or influenced by newer information. And this is because we are constantly being bombarded by information. We have new information coming in through our eyes and ears and nose and skin 24/7, and we have to find a place to put that new information. Now, when we're reconstructing an information, when we're trying to get the ingredients back for the recipe of a memory, sometimes new information gets put into the recipe, into the memory, making it less accurate. And this is just how memory works, and this is something that we have to deal with. Now, hindsight bias, don't worry about that. What we are going to worry about is misinformation effect and false memory syndrome. Now, with misinformation effect, this is the tendency of misleading information presented after an event to alter the memories of the event itself. So, for example, let's say you get into a car accident. Now, let's say you just bumped the car. You didn't hit it too hard, you just knocked into it, but no big damage. Now, later, the policeman might ask, like, okay, at what point did you destroy the car? At what point did you crash into the car? And so you may remember being violently crashing into the car rather than more peacefully, calmly bumping the bumper of the car. So sometimes, because of this constructive process, you could be given information that makes you remember something differently. And this could be used to, honestly, by the justice system to make you look more or less guilty. This is something that police, sometimes do to make you look more guilty, to, convict you and put you in prison or jail, or to give you a fine. So please be mindful of a situation, and especially when someone is trying to mislead you. There's also what's called false memory syndrome, the creation of an inaccurate or false memory through the suggestion of others, often while the person is under hypnosis. Well, we're not going to talk about hypnosis, but we will talk about the fact that sometimes people will say, hey, do you remember that time when at your second birthday you barfed all over the clown? Well, and then you say, oh yeah, I totally remember that. I blew chunks. All that cake and all that potato chips and all that hamburgers went flying all over the clown. I vomited so badly. Well, that never happened. Somebody just told you that you did this. They gave you false information and you believed that it happened. So in essence, a false memory is when you create a memory that never happened, that never existed. It's a complete lie. Evidence suggests that false memories can be created for just any kind of memory. The memories, although, must at least be plausible. So there has to be some element of reality. It has to be possible, therefore plausible. So being 2 years old and vomiting at a party on a clown, those are all plausible things. It's very possible for a 2-year-old to be at a birthday party, to eat too much cake, to vomit onto a clown, and it's very possible and plausible for a clown to be at a 2-year-old's birthday party. So if you try and make someone remember something that never happened, you just need to make sure that that information is plausible. Again, plausible. This is how you can misinform people. This is how you can create false memories. Curve of forgetting. So we're getting into forgetting and why we forget. So there's a number of theories, but one of them is the curve of forgetting, and another one is encoding failure. So encoding failure is pretty simple. It's failure to create a memory in the first place. So it's impossible to remember a memory you did not make. You can't remember something you never remembered in the first place, period. Now, curve of forgetting. This is a very interesting thing. This is the idea that you rapidly, quickly, within the first hour, lose most of a memory. And then after a while, gradually lose that memory. So let me show you in a curve here. So if I were to tell you a sentence that you needed to remember, you would immediately remember everything about that sentence. Immediately. If I asked you, 1 minute after telling you the sentence, you would remember. This was a famous study done by Ebbinghaus, by the way. And again, Ebbinghaus found that his recall of words was greatest immediately after learning the list, but rapidly decreased within the first hour. After the first hour, forgetting leveled off. So when we say leveled off, we mean leveled off. So it's getting more level, it's getting more flat. So the important thing to know is you forget very quickly within 20 minutes, 40% of the words in a list or 40% of the sentence. You also, within an hour, forget nearly 60% of the list of words or 60% of the sentence. But maybe 9 hours later, you remember about 39%. And maybe 2 days later, you remember maybe 33% of the words or 33%. But you'll tend to remember about 25% after 6 days and so on. And generally you'll still remember around 20% of the memory even a month later. So this is what we mean by forgetting levels off. It remains pretty consistent for days and days and weeks after you remembered something. Now, here's an example of encoding failure. So what we have here are pennies, and one of them is correct, one of them is not correct. So I'm not going to tell you which one is correct. I'm not going to tell you which one is incorrect. I will tell you, though, that the reason you may not remember which penny is the correct penny is because you failed to remember in the first place what a penny looks like. Because what exactly it looks like, where exactly the In God We Trust is, where exactly the Liberty is, where exactly the 2001 or the 1 cent is, where exactly they are is not important. The fact that it's worth 1 cent is important. So that's what you do encode. You don't encode where these little titles are. Again, I'll tell you which one is the correct one in class. Now, another one is decay and disuse. Decay and disuse. And basically this is the same idea, that if you don't use something, you're going to lose that memory. So if that information is not useful, if you don't remember it every day, you're going to lose it. And decay, this is the idea that things over time naturally decay, that things naturally fall apart. And so even if you use something every day, it's eventually going to become less and less and less complete until almost none of the original memory, almost none of the original information is there. So decay and disuse is a very common reason why we decay. This is why I say memories are not written in stone. They're written in paper, and paper can decay. It can rot away. It can be destroyed. There's also something called proactive interference and retroactive interference. And the basic idea of both is that you're learning new information all the time, and sometimes new information gets in the way of remembering old information, such as in retroactive interference. And sometimes older information prevents you from learning new information. So, for example, you learn things in your culture. Older information prevent you learning from new customs. For example, saying "bless you" when someone sneezes. On the other hand, new information can prevent you from learning old information. So, if you learn a new sport, if you've played basketball forever, an older sport, if you start playing baseball, it's going to be hard for you to learn baseball because this basketball is all you know. Now, for the homework, what's going to happen is you're going to recreate this chart on the back of the worksheet, and you're going to copy this part and also the reasons for forgetting. Don't worry about this part, but copy this part and copy this part. But for this part, you're not going to write description. You're going to write examples. And so for each one, you're going to replace the description with examples from your real life, from your everyday life. Now, there are two types of amnesia. Well, actually three. There's retrograde amnesia and there's anterograde amnesia. So the idea here is that they're both loss of memory, drastic, severe, terrible memory loss. So usually when you get an accident or severe head trauma, you will temporarily lose information from before the accident. Backwards, retro, backwards, back, retro, from the past. So if you get in an accident and you get your head hit very hard, you may forget things for hours before the accident or even days before the accident. But the good thing is, with retrograde amnesia, you will eventually get that information back. You will later remember everything. Now, anterograde amnesia. Anterograde means going forward. So you lose memory going forward. So you can remember everything from the past, but you can never remember the future. And you're constantly living in the past in your mind. And again, you have no ability to form new memories. And this is the worst one. There is what's called infantile amnesia. This is basically the inability to remember things from age 3 or below. Basically, no one remembers their first birthday or their second birthday because I don't really know. That's just how humans work. In autobiographical memory, people start to remember events and facts about their own life starting at age 3. Thank you guys for watching. Please use this information and information from the book to complete tonight's homework, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. Thank you very much.